Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Today we got Ash Mohamadi from Sweet James. Ash, it's so excited to see you and have you here. I can't even wait to discuss so many things with you.
I'm really happy to be here, my friend.
Good, because, we got a big conference coming up and your firm has I'm so excited. We're having even Saturday night's closing party is the Sweet James. Come to Sweet James Saturday.
Is it really?
Sweet James. Good thing you got a brilliant genius like Steve Mayer behind your company, being the wizard behind the curtain. How'd you find your way to Sweet James?
So I started my career at a law firm called Girardi & Keys, which no longer exists.
I wonder why. Go on.
And back then, actually, Steve, we were trying to get Steve to refer some cases because Steve, I think at that point was running Bond and Taylor, their own Bond and Taylor. So I remember actually distinctly the first time I met Steve because he was the most unique guy I've ever met in personal injury. This was like 2018. And we go to lunch and Steve is talking to us about building his own AI and training it how to perform different functions in his law firm in 2018. So this guy was clearly ahead of the curve. He was unlike anyone that I'd ever met. And I knew in that moment, I'm like, okay, I need to probably stick pretty close to this guy. That's how I first met him.
Well, I met him for the first time at his office because Elisa K. Boss invited me to come over. And even just being in his office, like he's got this board with all of the different divisions and all this writing on it. Like I'm trying to run a little business here with two people. I'm trying to think like, geez, this guy's got like 500 people to organize. This is a lot of brain power and a lot of organizational. That if you like that kind of stuff, all the power to you. I couldn't stand the operations or running a firm. I just wanted to be a lawyer when I practiced law. That I found fun. I hated dealing with rent, insurance, advertising, marketing, all this stuff, crazy stuff. But that's why I don't do that. So Ash, prior to getting to Sweet James and prior to Girardi & Keys, at some point, how is it where, little Ash got the little idea to say, I want to be a lawyer one day?
Well, I guess it starts pretty early. I grew up with a mom who, from the time I was 5 years old, would basically tell me, hey, you got three options. You're either going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, or you're going to be an engineer. And I think I realized pretty early on that I wasn't that talented in math or science. The doctor and engineer was kind of working against the grain for me.
But you got that smile and that charm. So that's not that helpful at doctor engineering. It might be helpful in some other profession.
Yeah, and I could always talk. I had a big mouth and I was always talking as a kid. And I love to argue. I love to try to persuade people. So I think what really tipped the scales for me into wanting to become a lawyer is when I was in college. I was over at UC Santa Barbara. And they had this program back in the day. I don't know if they still have it, but it was called UCDC. So what they would do is they would take like 10 or 15 kids from every UC school, put them in a dorm building in Washington, D.C. for like a quarter, so like 4 months. And you had to take some classes, but most of what you did was you were supposed to get an internship in the city. And my internship was with the Federal Public Defender's Office. So I started working there as what was called an intern investigator. And our job was basically to go out into usually Southeast DC, which is like the worst part of DC. And it's probably one of the worst areas in the country, to be honest. And we were supposed to find witnesses to help defend our clients because, we're the public defender's office. So we're helping out people who can't afford a lawyer for, accused of these crimes. And it was a very eye-opening experience. But I think the biggest part of it was that I was assigned to this one lawyer in the office who they touted this guy as their best trial lawyer. He was good. He was a fine lawyer, but I just remember as like a young kid, I was probably like 21 years old and I'm sitting in the pews watching this guy do his thing. And I'm just like, this guy's not that special. I can't believe this guy's the best trial lawyer they have in the office. And so I think at that moment I realized, okay, this is accessible. Like this is something I could potentially do.
And sure enough, you were able to figure it out. So you figure this out in college and you get this
Hmm.
bug. And, I remember you talk about the more challenging parts of town. Like I was doing this one murder case that I did back in Detroit. And like where this guy grew up and where this all happened was a very, very, very place where, walking around there, every time a car would go by, people stare at me like, you must want to die. What are you doing in this neighborhood? You don't belong here. I'm like, I agree, but I don't want to die. I'm just trying to find some witnesses here, knocking on doors. Like, you see what happened? I was a lawyer then, but still, when you're, basically a public defender with no income, you got to go out and be your own investigator. I didn't have the kind of money to hire Ash and get the investigators done. And so you get this bug to be a lawyer. Where you end up going to law school?
So I ended up going to Loyola Law School in downtown LA,
Oh,
which ended up being great for me. I remember being so upset I didn't get into UCLA. And now thinking back, I'm like, thank God.
wow.
It was a great school. It was, I think, probably the best trial lawyers in the country come out of Loyola,
I don't know if
Southwestern.
Panish would agree with you.
Yeah, well,
And
Southwestern's on the list.
Southwestern.
Yeah, Loyola, Southwestern, and like Whittier. So I was very
We have
lucky.
our buddy Mike Sanchez, Mr. Whittier himself, just got himself a $5 million verdict. Go, Mikey, go. He's not just a good
Exactly.
marketer and businessman. He wants to be the guy in the front of the stage, too. That takes a lot. That's impressive, because to develop the skill, even to go in and try one case, like to work that hard. So kudos to Mr. Sanchez. But so you
Yeah.
go to Loyola. Did you do anything in law school, like trial ad, moot court, anything like that to help get you ready and comfortable for the stage of trial?
Yeah, I did this thing called the Hobbs program, where it's basically you go intern at the DA's office, and I was assigned in Compton. So you get to do some stuff. You don't really get to try a case necessarily, but you get to argue some motions in front of the court, which is pretty cool. And then part of the program is you do some trial advocacy stuff. But I would say really I didn't get any substantive training until I was actually a lawyer.
Really, what type of substantive training did you get when you were a lawyer besides doing the TLU Trial Skills Bootcamp, which we'll talk about later? I mean, that was the top of the mountain, but go on.
Oh man, trying cases. Actually, trying cases was how I learned how to do it. And I think to a certain degree, that is the only way to learn how to do it, because you can do trial advocacy in school or in different programs. But the reality is that it's so different once you're actually there, and very few programs will actually train you on the things that matter, like the storytelling aspect, the clarity, talking to people like you're a human being, not a robot. And so, obviously those are things that you incorporate into your program, but not a lot of people do. I learned by doing, and I was lucky enough at the time to work at a firm where they would let young lawyers try cases. And I was one of those young lawyers.
And so that was Girardi and Keese when it was still a prestigious place to belong to. We'll talk about that.
Yeah,
But so how many years were you at Girardi and Keese before you went over to Sweet James?
I was there for 8 years. I was there for eight
Wow.
years. Yeah. And
How'd you get started there? Because like places like that and like Simon Law Group and, there's places that are tougher to get into. So how did you get your way into the door at Girardi and Keese?
so when I was in law school, I was going to Loyola at the same time as a son of one of the partners at the firm, and a very nice guy, good friend of mine to this day. And he invited me to come play in the Landau League for the Girardi team. So basically, there's this lawyers basketball league in downtown LA, and all the different firms will have a team, and they had a team. And back then, I used to be okay at basketball. I played basketball in high school, so I went and played for them, and was going pretty well. And it ended up going so well that I ended up asking actually for a job, or it was really an internship because I wasn't getting paid. Back when you could do that. And so I started working at the firm that way. That's how I got my foot in the door. And it kind of blossomed from there, to be honest.
So you're there 8 years. How many trials do you think you did while you were there? When somebody says approximately 31, approximately 31. You weren't keeping track though. So approximately how many would you say you did?
I think to verdict 12, and then there was one that we settled in the middle of the trial. Thank God.
How many of those were you the lead? I know you tried a lot of cases with Chris May. And so, like, how many of those would you say you were lead or co-lead on?
I would say only like 3 of them, maybe 4.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 or 5 actually, probably lead or co-lead. So I was getting a lot of initially. The first 2, I was basically carrying the briefcase, and then
And you were lucky to do that.
I was lucky to do that. And I remember the moment where Chris offered me my first witness. He actually offered me the witness right before, as the witness was going on to the stand. And I remember
for
that
the
moment.
record, I think that's insane to do that to people. Like, if you get somebody a witness, you practice in the office. Okay, I'm going to be the witness. How do you think you should do it direct? Because, we practice direct examination now at my boot camp, and most people, when they start out with direct, like, so tell us, when did this happen? Where were you living at? That all these questions, one fact, one answer. I'm like, no, you got to ask questions. So tell us about the day where you fall and get hurt. What happens on that day? You know what I mean? An open-ended question, so you get but like, fuck, dude, no practice. So, but can we all safely assume that you crushed it?
I doubt that. I mean, well, basically what happened is I remember the moment so much because it was a very pivotal moment that I think a lot of young lawyers, a lot of people in any profession really will reach, where they get an opportunity and they either say yes or no. And if they say no, then well, who knows when the next opportunity is going to come. And if they say yes, it basically opens the door to, expediting your career. And I remember that moment where I looked at Chris. He looked at me and he said, "Do you want to take this witness?" And I looked at him and I immediately said, "Yes." And then I could see him kind of reeling. He was like, "Actually, maybe I'll do it." And I'm like, "No, I got it. Don't worry." And so thankfully I was, staking it until I made it big time. But I ended up taking the witness, and that it didn't go badly. So I was able to do more and more, and then it just escalated from there.
So I disagree on one thing, though. I think that before you get in and try, it's just like a lot of my people I know send young lawyers to court for their first trial, maybe without any training, and shit cases. And you know what happens to this young lawyer? Predictably, they get shellacked. And then they get
discouraged.
And they get discouraged because this thing called the ego is kind of a fragile thing that needs to be cultivated and protected. And, it's one thing to go to, I'll go try a case for a $10,000 offer, as long as it's a good case that's been well worked up and it's not, people did the depositions and actually, were thoughtful about it, didn't treat it like it was a waste of time. Because, when cases are treated like that, and those are typically the ones that often go to trial, because the insurance company's like, "I'm not paying you a fucking dime. You guy's a liar. He ran the light. He's only got Cairo, and he's got 3 years gap in treatment." And this young lawyer's like, for a skilled lawyer to get a positive verdict would take a lot. For a young lawyer, no chance. And they just go get shellacked, and then, that happens a few times, and then they stop going. They become settlement lawyers. So if you train, though, and, you know what you're doing before you get there, and so you start to do things with intention instead of just, people are like, "Oh, I'm just going to be authentic and be in the moment." I'm like, yeah, you can be the moment of called up being a fucking loser. Yeah, authentic, a nervous wreck of a human being that's shaking and stuttering in front of a jury and can't make eye contact. There's nothing authentic about that insecurity. So that's what I'd say about now. Doing is good if you're intentionally doing stuff and you're having somebody giving you feedback and coaching you the whole time. Then there's more value than doing. And you have a good mentor who's actually showing you and, teaching you how to do it correctly instead of just doing it, because there is a best way to do things. But we move on from there. So you get your experience there, and Steve gives you an offer to join Sweet James before the Girardi hit an iceberg and sank. And Tom lost his poor mind. I think he was losing it. From what I would see, I'd see that guy speak at conferences, somewhat of like a keynote. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? This guy's having trouble putting 2 sentences together. Sure, he's a nice guy, but probably helps that he's paying for everything. Little did we know with other people's money, with clients' money, but such is life. Must move on. Good thing you got there. So Sweet James. So been there for 6 years now. I went to your Christmas party. I have to say, out of all the firms I've ever been to, I've never felt sort of like a family connection like I did at your holiday party with all those people there, and then talking to so many people there and hearing stories how Sweet James changed their lives, from opportunities to grow to leaving them and giving their first job and going from the receptionist to running a department there, and the increase in responsibilities, and really building, your team, from internally. I mean, I was just, I was so impressed with the operation. So, and like all the, met so many people that, that I kind of know before, like Mo from, I used to work with my other buddies down in LA, and Al, who came out and did the boot camp with, was it with you? Did you do the boot camp with Al? Because it was Bobby and Carlos. So you and Al. So, I mean, it's just like, I knew him a little bit before, but obviously a lot more now. So anyway, it's just a great group of people. But what's your favorite thing about being there?
I mean, probably what you just hit on, the culture. So the top-down culture is basically one of team first. And I think Steve and Bobby and James do a really good job of perpetuating that throughout the firm. There's, amongst the lawyers, obviously you're always going to have competition, healthy competition, sometimes unhealthy competition. But I think at our firm, we've really done a good job of striking a balance where even though we are competitive with each other, we all help each other. So we have a Slack chat that is basically going off all day about this expert, this defense firm. Do you have a draft for this type of motion? All those types of things. And so I think that's probably my favorite thing about the firm, other than the fact that at this point, we built up so much trust that I get complete autonomy. I get to litigate my cases the way I see fit, and I get to spend the money which I think is appropriate to spend on any given case, which is something that is very rare. Because I'll tell you, I speak to litigators all over the state, and very rarely will you find someone who says, yes, when I ask for an expert, I get my expert, I get my war chest. And, sometimes I'll ask for money on a case that doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere, but they'll still greenlight it. And I think that is something that as a lawyer, although this is a business at the end of the day, you still have a duty. And part of that duty means spending the money on the cases, even though it may not make money sense for the firm. And I'm glad I work somewhere where they really walk the walk when it comes to that principle.
The highlight of TLU for me was having the opportunity to network with attorneys from out of state.
TLU has been amazing. I'm so glad I came. It was one of the most inspiring events I've been to. Great networking, great food. It's been amazing. I can't wait for next year.
And so at Sweet James, you have had the opportunity. How many trials have you done since you've been there?
I've been at Sweet James since March of 2020. So my first day on the job was the first day of COVID. So it's kind of the first day of lockdown from COVID. So that was so pretty funny
because like that first day on your job, how momentous it was for you was like, when the first COVID it rolled into this world, like I'm sitting, I just moved in to the 48th floor of a new apartment building in downtown LA. I got this big dream. I got this 3-bedroom apartment, beautiful overlooking things. I'm going to start running a little trial, pad. So when people got trials downtown, they could stay at my place. I just had this big dream. And then obviously COVID changed all that dream. But obviously COVID was the greatest thing that ever happened in my life. I mean, helped me, how am I going to get all the greatest trial lawyers to be stuck at home and only have Zoom to keep themselves relevant and, and keep connected to the rest of our people. I mean, that was what I needed at most for. I was all by myself. Like I was really by myself in downtown LA, like no girlfriend, no family here, and your friends, everybody's afraid to see each other because they want to get, I'm like, this can't be that bad. But it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what everybody else is doing, and you're just home by yourself. And so, a buddy of mine calls me up. He's like, Ambrose, you got to do something to serve your community. I'm like, he's like, this is when real business is done. I'm like, what are you talking? What am I supposed to do? And he's like, I don't know. Do something. I'm just telling you, got to do something. And then another one of my friends comes over and we're looking at CBN, Court Review Network, watching a trial, and I'm commenting and, I'm probably criticizing the trial lawyer. And he's like, you should do a live play-by-play. And, and maybe even get the trial lawyers to come on and comment on what they're doing. I'm like, that's not a bad idea. And then the next day we did our first program, and then there was like 70 people on, and the next day was 150 people on. The next day was like 300 people on, and and then people like Panish and Rowley and Claggett and all the top trial lawyers, started to get to know them, and even people like, Mark Lanier. I mean, it was great. I got to get to know so many people, which I was able to, obviously, when COVID ended, still maintain, those relationships and start putting together conferences like the one. And the best part about it all, Ash, is that Huntington Beach on June is it's going to be, have you ever been to a TLU program
Yeah.
to stop by at all? Okay. So did you stop by last year?
Yep.
At Huntington Beach? All right.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, but this, that was my best performance ever. But this one is going to be, it's going to be better. It has to be better. I have to improve. I mean, by this time we're going to have a live voir dire room, though. So Nick Riley's doing a TBI voir dire. Joe Freed's doing a trucking voir dire. Kurt Zahner's doing a premises voir dire. And so, this guy, Ben Rabinowitz, is doing a wrongful death. So I got all these great lawyers lined up to do real focus groups. That's one thing different. And even better than that, you're coming with our other buddy, Bobby, and, teaching there. So what are you guys teaching about, at TLU? That's what the $1 million question is.
I love how I have to follow up Rowley and all the other guys you listed.
You're in that same league, so you're just younger and better looking.
I don't know about that.
You're definitely younger.
Definitely younger. But Bobby and I actually, what we thought about, the best thing to talk about, because I think it can be sort of a black box for attorneys at least their first couple times getting out there and trying cases, is how to communicate non-economic damages. And I think there's a million ways to skin a cat, and everyone's got different ways to talk about non-economic damages and how to put them in context. But we've kind of put together our own formula. And I'll tell you right from the bat that I take from everybody. So I'm very much a student of the game. I read everything Rowley puts out there, Keith Mitnick, Raul Ravipudi, all these guys. So these are the masters of the craft. And I absorb everything that they have to say. And I, will take a little bit from here, take a little bit from there, and kind of mash it together and make my own monster. And so what we thought about is we're going to present on how to communicate non-economic damages, specifically breaking down each element and talking about how to relate that word to something in your client's life. And then the magic sauce, which is basically you need your star witness. And a lot of times your star witness is not your client. Most of the time it's not your client. So identifying that person, giving them a path to success, and being able to communicate with the jury about these concepts.
Okay, so let's put this into context by discussing your last 3 trials. So your last trial, I think, was some type of slip and fall at a hospital. Is that right?
Yes. So our last trial involved a lady, a 60-year-old lady who was visiting her mom at the hospital. Her mom was in bad condition. And as she's walking down the hallway, she slips and falls on a spill of liquid. Now, she's on the ground. All the nurses rush over and they go to help her up. And eventually they get her on her feet and they take her down to the ER to get checked out. As she's in the ER, she doesn't see a doctor. She's put in this program called the Fast Track, where you're only treated by physician's assistants and nurse practitioners.
Wait, that's every hospital visit. What are you talking about?
Well, actually, no. A lot in normal ER, you will see a doctor eventually, but you start off with the PA or the NP. In this program, you typically never see the doctor at all. So no doctor ever sees you or lays hands on you. And that's what happened with our client. They end up doing an x-ray of her hip. The x-ray comes back positive for a fracture, which they disputed, but they'd never tell her. So our client goes home, and for a year, she's walking on that non-displaced fracture, making it worse and worse and worse until it finally just gives way. And so because she didn't know for a year, she didn't hire us for a year. And by the time we got the case, all the surveillance footage showing where the spill came from was gone. So we could not prove where the liquid came from, how long it was there, or whether or not the defendant knew or should have known about it. And so our strategy in the case ended up becoming proving that through the testimony of their head of maintenance, that what happened here is that every night they were buffing and scrubbing these floors with an electric scrubber and kind of making them as smooth as possible to make them, quote, shiny. And that process was taking all the friction out of the floor. And so when the floor got wet, the slip coefficient numbers were dangerously low, like some of the lowest numbers I've ever seen. It's more slippery than ice. And we were able to prove to the jurors that because the defendants created this circumstance through their own conduct, their maintenance program, buffing and scrubbing the floors, they were charged with notice, even though we couldn't prove notice.
And so the damages, what was the offer on this case prior to trial?
So there was literally no offer for 4 years, 3 or 4 years. And about 2 months before trial, a couple months before trial, they offered us $300,000. And at that point, we'd spent more than $300,000 on, just litigating the case in terms of costs. So we ended up taking the case to trial. And there was some discussions of settlement during, but nothing really ever materialized. And the verdict ended up being $3.9 million with a 15% comparative finding. So once you subtract that, it was about 337, something like that.
Did you say 15% or 50?
15%.
Okay, it sounded like 50. That's why I thought your math was a little messed up.
No.
So damages. So what you're going to teach in Huntington Beach about talking about these elements of damages from every witness, every aspect you can find. Give us an example of who provided damages testimony in this case that you would not typically think, oh, I'm going to get damages testimony from this person.
So, it started in discovery. So, one of the first things that we do when we're in the discovery stage is we ask the client for photos from both before and after. So we want as many photos of them doing activities as possible before the incident. And then we want the photos afterwards to show what the changes are in their lives. So in this case, our client was a very active lady, had a big family, and they would go on vacations all the time. They would do water sports. They would go hiking. They'd travel the world with her church, all kinds of stuff. So there was a whole bunch of activities she was engaged in before. And then we contrasted that with the photos of after. And the way that we did that is, obviously, you don't have photos of you not going on vacation, right? So the way that we showed the difference was we had her take photos of all the things in her home that had changed. She had 2 different walkers around her house that she now had to use. She had 2 different canes. She had benches all over the place so she could sit down and rest. She had a special contraption on her toilet that she would use to get up and down off the toilet. She had a special contraption on her bed that she would use just to get in and out of bed with all these different special pillows. So, and there was, way more than that. There was pads in her car. There was a chair in her shower with all these different hooks to hang things from so she could reach them. So what these photos showed is that this lady's life had done a complete 180-degree turn. The other thing that we were able to get, and this is always key in all of our trials, we always look for this, is we look for our star witness. In this case, the star witness was her best friend from church. And her best friend from church had this quality about her that we could spot right away, where she was just the most genuine person you've ever met. Like, I'm sure you could think of people like this in your life that you know. There's just that person who's so genuine and so likable that everything they say is sort of funny. And she, even when they don't mean to be. And this lady was 100% that. She just exuded genuineness and honesty. Like, she would not lie about anything. And when we asked her, is this the same person that you knew before the incident? She told us straightforward no, and why, all the reasons she felt that way. So that witness was huge. Like, you could see the jurors were just eating up everything she was saying, because when you had your client on the stand, and that they actually didn't love our client, so they didn't believe what she was saying about her injuries. They were kind of, skeptical about what her daughters were saying, because the daughters, they felt, had somewhat of an interest in the case, but her friend didn't have any skin in the game. So that was a huge witness for us.
So in addition to that 3-9, you got a couple other verdicts of significance. And the one right before that was 16 or something like that?
The one before that was a big car accident case that was admitted liability up in Hanford, so in Kings County, which is Central California. And that verdict was 17.4 for two clients. Obviously, it was an admitted liability case, so there wasn't really a lot to talk about in terms of what happened with the crash, but it was a very big crash. The biggest challenges for us were that the defendant was a city employee. So the defendant in the case was the city of Hanford, which means the funds were public funds. The other challenge is that this county had the biggest verdict in the history of the county that I'm aware of was about 6.4 million. And so when we went to negotiate the settlement of the case, the defense position was basically, hey, you're asking for way too much money. These people will not give that much money, even if you feel the case is worth it. Even if you feel it could get that in LA County, you're not going to get it here. So the top offer was 7.65, something like that.
Takes a lot of stones to turn down 7.65 in, Trump country, God's country. So
yeah.
And so it was a bad car wreck, two plaintiffs. Just give us an idea what their injuries were so we can understand the 7.65. I mean, that sounds pretty serious.
So they were pretty catastrophic injuries. So one of them, the passenger, was the older sister. And by the way, the two clients were sisters. They were two sisters one in their late 70s, one in their early 80s.
Jeez.
Yeah.
See, they're getting tougher.
So that was another problem. Is that they unfortunately didn't have a whole lot of life left to live. And so the argument was, hey, even if you give these ladies $1 million a year, that's still not what you're asking for. Still way less than you're asking for. So basically, what ended up happening is that we made the case about the fact that these two ladies were absolute outliers. Like, you've never met anyone like them in your life. These are the type of ladies that they lived on a bigger piece of land, and they would drive a 1960s tractor to till the land, their own land. This lady was in her 90s doing this. They would climb ladders to paint their own house every couple of years. They would do iron work in the backyard. They would, one of them was a painter. They would do everything on their own. They were not dependent on their family for anything, all their own shopping, their cleaning, everything. So our argument was that these two ladies had spent their entire lifetimes, 80 or 90 years, preserving their health. They didn't smoke, they didn't drink, they exercised, they ate well, they kept their minds healthy. And in an instant, all of that was taken from them. And they ended up becoming, their nightmare, which is, people who are going to spend their golden years depending on others for everything. And that's unfortunately the situation that they were in.
So what did you utilize, as far as, again, your presentation? So applying that presentation in this case, how did you get these damages? Because for two people that old, it takes, like I said, a lot of stones to turn down that money, no matter what happened to them in the place you were. Especially they're counting on you. That increases the pressure. It's not like you turn down 200,000 or even $1 million. So how did you build the damages with your philosophy?
So our damages presentation is always two prongs. We take the jury instruction, that's 3905A, and we talk about the two elements that are in the jury instruction. And the jury instruction says you can base your finding of non-economic damages on two things: the evidence and common sense. So we start with the evidence, which is where we get the testimony. And again, we really heavily relied on photographs in that case. We took photographs from what their property looked like before, and then showed the jury photographs of what the property looked like today. And it was totally dilapidated. It went from having a beautiful front yard full of green grass to being weeds. Their land in the back was perfectly tilled to being completely in disarray. Their home was painted and clean to having now, damage to the front of it and not having anyone having fixed it. So, all of these things help build the story. And actually, one of the biggest moments in the case was, and this was our star witness in that case, was the ER doctor. And what ended up happening is that the ER doctor came to testify about, because we were alleging traumatic brain injury, we needed someone to talk and lay the foundation of what their initial symptoms were to establish the brain injury. ER doctor comes in, we start asking her about those symptoms, and then we start asking her about her experience with people with traumatic brain injuries. And all of a sudden, the air leaves the room, it's completely sucked out of the room, and the ER doctor pauses, and she sniffles, and it seems like she's going to start breaking down. And she says, actually, I have a lot of experience with traumatic brain injuries because my husband is a traumatic brain injury survivor. And she didn't need to say anything else, because in that moment, the jury perceived one thing: wow, this is really bad. Because this lady is sitting here, an ER doctor, about to break down at the mention of her husband having a traumatic brain injury. This is not something that people can just move on and live a normal life with. This affects every facet of your life. And that she said that with nearly no words, or communicated that with nearly no words. So that was one obviously huge moment in the case in terms of the evidence, the testimony, and the photos. The second half of the equation is obviously the common sense, and that's where we get a little bit more creative, right? And in that case, we basically took a couple tools that, I've borrowed from some great lawyers, like Arash Homanpour does this thing with the Mona Lisa. And we gave the jury this analogy about these two ladies having gone to Paris to see the Mona Lisa. And as they're in the Louvre Museum, a fire breaks out, and the firefighters only have time to respond to either save the Mona Lisa or save these two ladies. And what are they going to choose? Are they going to choose the $1 billion painting, or are they going to choose to save these two ladies from Hanford, California? And the obvious answer was that, of course, they would save the human beings. And the message is that although we as people think, or we as jurors might think, that we don't make decisions about what a human life is worth on a daily basis, it's not true. We make decisions about the value of a human life and the value of quality of life all the time. And nearly every time we make that decision, we decide that the value of human life or quality of life is more than any material item. And so that was the message we gave jurors to kind of, help them understand that the numbers we were asking for, at that point, I think we ended up asking for 24 million.
What was the
totally
24
fair.
million based upon? Like, how did you justify it other than saying 24 million?
So basically, we did not a per diem, but a per year. So we broke it down. This is typically what we do. We'll break down each element of the non-economic damages, and then we'll weight them differently depending on the evidence. And we'll explain to the jurors, this is why pain is weighted more heavily than loss of enjoyment of life, for example, because the doctors testified she's going to be in extreme pain for the rest of her life, right? And that's worse. So we would weight them differently, walk the jurors through why we chose those numbers based on the evidence, and then just basically do it for 1 year and then multiply that times the amount of years they've had in the past and the amount of years they have left to live into the future.
Then before that, you had one other significant verdict at Sweet James with your friend Bobby. And that was actually even better. So what was that case about? Because I remember that case too.
That was a death case. So basically what happened in that case is a 30-year-old woman who was born developmentally disabled was living in a care facility. It's called an adult residential facility. And during the day, she was going to what's called a day program. So basically she lives in this home, and during the day she goes to it's kind of like school. You go there from the morning to the early afternoon. They pick you up and bring you back home. And they're basically responsible for her on every level. What happened was, out of nowhere, this girl, after a change in her medication, started developing very weird symptoms. She was drooling, she was disoriented, she couldn't stand up straight, she was falling down, she was slurring her words, all kinds of very alarming signs. And what we learned through their own policies and procedures is that this is called what's called a change in condition. And because these facilities don't have any doctors in them, they're all, non-licensed people. Their rule is if you see a change in condition, you call 911 or you call a doctor. You don't decide for yourself that this isn't serious because you're not qualified to make that decision. You don't call balls and strikes. You get a doctor involved so they call the balls and strikes. And so what happened is this girl had these symptoms for one day. They didn't do anything. She had the symptoms the very next day. They didn't do anything. And then the next morning, she falls and she just passes out dead on the living room carpet. So we represented the mother. And one of the issues was that, the mother had put her daughter in a residential facility. And, some people feel that means the relationship is worth less. The other problem is that the girl was developmentally disabled. And some people will also feel that makes the relationship worth less. So our challenge was to communicate to the jurors that that's actually not the case, but we needed a good reason for that. And, it didn't take much digging, to be honest with you, to realize that our client, the mother, who was an absolutely incredible person, that she had given us everything we needed. So early in her daughter's life, her mother had written a book about her daughter called My Forever Child. And the idea is that when you have a child who's developmentally disabled, they always bring you the joy that a child does. Because when you have, any...
Regular kids, they grow up and become assholes.
Exactly.
Like, they're like a
is.
fucking 5-year-old forever. It's just the sweetest thing. They're full grown, but hi! Oh my God, it's a TV!
Exactly. So everyone else's kids, they get to 12 and they don't want to have anything to do with you. And then they're 18 and they're out of the house. They come to see you once a month. And then they get married.
When they need money.
When they need money. And then they get married and then now their allegiance is to someone else, And so what Carla was able to explain is that all her kids had done that except for Casera. And what Casera is that Casera would bring her joy every day. So Carla would go see her at least every 2 weeks. She would see her very regularly, and she would go to see her specifically for every single holiday because her daughter loved holidays. And because of this old lady would celebrate Christmas, Easter, Halloween, every holiday you could imagine. And it would bring her joy to do these. It was fun for her because she was retired. She didn't have anything else to do. This was her life. And you can't replace that. And so our argument to the jurors was, this relationship is actually worth more than a typical mother-daughter relationship because this relationship brought her far more joy. This child was with her far more often than a 30-year-old child typically would be. And I think the jurors understood that. That case was a very, very tough liability case. And so it ended up being a 4-month trial.
What?
No, excuse me, 2 months.
2 months?
2 months, yeah.
How many
we had a little bit of a
witnesses did you
break.
call?
Close to 30.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know what I always say is that I actually got very lucky with that case because it was so fact intensive, so document intensive, that one of the things I got really lucky with is that when I initially got that case, it was COVID. It was a shutdown. And so I had nothing to do because the courts were closed. I just started this new job and I was like dying to get started, but there weren't trials. No trials were going to happen. No court appearances were going to happen. Nothing was going to get moved forward. And so what I did is I just dove deep into these cases, including that case. And I knew, there was like 5,000 pages of records. I knew every single page inside and out. And that was one thing that I got really lucky with in that case. But what ended up happening is, so we asked the jurors for 45 million and they gave us exactly half of that. And what happened was we were actually like one juror away from getting the full 45, but one juror that we had left on our jury, who probably looking back wasn't the greatest choice.
You think?
Yeah, she was the
22
CFO.
million.
She was the CFO of the city of Fontana. So she was very accustomed to breaking down budgets and this and that. But it was just the voir dire got a little hinky, and we wanted to make sure we got the trial started, so we ended up keeping her. But yeah, she cut it in half. But we weren't complaining with that verdict.
Apparently, you are complaining. So nothing's ever enough, is it, Ash? Typical PI lawyer.
I think the verdict was, I forgot if it was 22.75 or 23.75.
Was that your first trial at Sweet James?
No, my first trial was that was my second trial. My first trial was like an auto case that was an injection case that we just had to try because they were kind of making an issue of it. The defense hated the case, and we ended up getting a verdict for I think it was like $200,000, something like that.
Well, what was the offer? Nothing?
Offer was $100,000.
Okay, so you doubled the offer.
Yeah.
Plus, you got some reps in. You got warmed up for your big case. Got your ring rust off after a few years of sitting on the bench. So, thank God for that case.
And actually, that case, by the way, was virtual. So I tried that case virtually on Zoom, and it was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. It was in Riverside with Judge Carol Green, and the jurors were all at home on their devices, some of them on their cell phones.
Oh my God.
So they couldn't see our exhibits. They were dropping like flies because their own Wi-Fi was really bad. Some of them were on cell phone service. So it was a travesty of justice, but we ended up getting through it. Thank God.
What's nuts is my friend Giorgio, Giorgio teaches with me, and his mom got a $25.5 million verdict on a virtual trial on this electrocution, got an arc flash burn case. Because I thought that was crazy, but it really worked out. Obviously, worked out great.
Yeah.
So some of that kind of that COVID things, sometimes those virtual jurors work out pretty well. That's for sure. So
I would have been terrified to try a big case on Zoom.
Oh my God, I was terrified for him. And he was like, "Well, this is what we got to do. It's either this or wait 3 more years." And clients, nobody wants to wait 3 more years, so we're going for it. I'm like, knock yourselves out. Your client, your money, you figure it out. But they fucking hit a home run. So that was pretty darn cool.
And so you have to practice in the deposition. You practice in motion hearings. You practice at the grocery store. That's why you have a family. You practice on them. You have to keep the skill up or it erodes. It's simple as that.
Somebody give us an overview of this case.
Or I call wowing it. And what I mean by wisdom of the wise is, why are we still right in spite of this fact?
These are just some of the clips when I was cross-examined 10 years ago, remember that.
About 11 o'clock at night, and he leaves this message. I got a brilliant idea. Every conversation he starts, I have a brilliant idea.
Well, welcome everybody. We've got a good crowd here today.
Ash, as far as we were talking about training before, because you did my boot camp about a year ago, isn't that right? You and was it you and Al Yassan? And so and that was the case you worked on, the first one, the slip and fall. That's how I could remember it. So what kind of skills did you take away? This is when the boot camp was only 3 days, by the way. Now it's 5. You know why? It's not because the lawyers are worse that are coming now. They're so bad now, guys. I'm like, I got to add 2 more days to this boot camp. But honestly, it's because as we continue to, because since you've done this program, I've probably done it 20 times. I mean, and every time I make improvements and, both with how we're teaching and the order we're teaching to make sure that it's so important, because I read a lot of books on high performance, like this book right here called Peak, The Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. Because there's no such thing as talent. There's nobody that's gifted. There's people who focus and work relentlessly on one skill long enough that it just looks like it was a miracle. It looks like they were born with it. Like Michael Jordan in basketball or, Wayne Gretzky in a hockey puck. And so, but what skills, even though we were in our earlier phases from where we are now, because I'm so stoked, because I'm especially stoked on Sidelight because with Steve and with Bobby and stuff, we've been talking about SJU, Sweet James University, because, you have so many lawyers there. And like you said, it's hard to get reps, right? And you want people to go into trial with confidence, with a playbook, with a plan, and not just sit there and just, because getting experience in the courtroom. Yeah, you get experience getting your ass kicked. I hope, it's not a positive one. And so, because I'm going out to this firm out in Connecticut called Carter Mario, where I've done a couple of trainings before, a couple of boot camps with them before, but this is the first one that's done the expanded boot camp. And I was talking to my buddy Luke, because I have a meeting with him today. I'm like, dude, you're going to be pissed at me. He's like, why? I'm like, because we are so much better now than we were when we did your last boot camp a year and a half ago. I'm just afraid you're going to ask for some type of refund. But I'm like, he's like, no, it was good. I'm like, I'm just joking with you. But it is that much better. At least in my opinion, I think it's that much better. But when you did the program, when it was still in its little, it was only like 40 programs in. Now we're like 60 programs in. So what were your big takeaways that, you think that you actually put into practice in the trial?
Well, it was huge. I mean, I specifically workshopped that trip and fall or the slip and fall case that you mentioned in the hospital. So, I found my story through the boot camp. I basically was able to figure out a way to communicate to the jurors that even though what the hospital was doing was cleaning their floors, essentially making them nice and shiny, that was negligence. And that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to convince the jurors of that, I think. And then performance-wise, one thing that I really took away that I think I implemented pretty well was slowing down.
That's a big thing.
Yeah. Making eye contact.
The thought to be intentional with the pace of your speech is a big thing. Really that, and making eye contact with people and connecting with them before you start talking. Like just those two things. If people walk away, it's just that. For so many people, it's such a game changer. They call me like, oh my God, it was just such a different experience. Like I felt so connected to the jury. I'm like, yeah, you were actually looking in their eyes and talking with them, and they're actually connected and like they're not looking away, when you're talking to them. So that's just those things are so critical. But now I should be happy to know that it's way beyond that now, because because I always think about obviously providing value for people, right? I mean, it's like, everybody, like you said, it's a profession, but it's a business. And, when new lawyers come into a firm, or when people are younger and lawyers, I think the very first thing people should be learning, first week of being, practicing law, if not before, is how to prepare witnesses, plaintiffs for their depositions, and how to really prepare them. Not give them some video that says, "Hey, don't answer anything that wasn't asked. Keep your answers short. Don't volunteer anything, and let's just survive this." I mean, that's basically what a lot of people's witness prep is, and so that's devastating. So we really that's what I used to do professionally, because witness prep is all about teaching the witness how to transport themselves back in time and space, so they can relive the event. Because everybody that's been traumatized, the first thing they do is what? Try to bury it all, right? Repress it so they won't be depressed and be happy again. And now they're happy again. And what? You, the lawyer, want to come along and rip all those bandages off and make them suffer in pain? Like I've had, clients that I'm prepping before say Amy, like, why are you asking me this? You know the whole story. Why do you want me to suffer? I don't want to suffer. I'm like, I don't want you to suffer either. But, this is about getting to justice, and justice is about money. And you cannot expect the jury just to guess what happened to you, or just to extrapolate it from what the doctor said or from what I say. They have to hear it from you. And so you have to have the courage to go into that darkness, open up that, it's basically like a room. They have to go into that room, be in that room, and, and talk about what happened. But when we're done prepping, we're going to come out, we're going to close that door, and you're going to still be happy again. And they have to trust you that you can take them on that journey, and that you will go on that journey with them, because you have to go on that journey with them. That you have to be there with them. You have to feel their pain. That's why I quit doing witness prep. It was depressing the shit out of me, right? Because I have to go into these darkest moments of people's lives with them. But then after you do that, now you have to get them to be able to talk about it in a coherent question and answer format. And so after we do that, because the preparation is always, we always start out with the story of happiness. So some story that happened before the fucking traumatic event, where it's like what kind of story are you talking about? Any story you think about where a smile crosses your face. And so like a common one is for parents. You're a parent, right?
Yeah.
And how old
Brand
are your
new.
children or your child?
I got one girl. She is 7 months old.
Okay. So, but like when you teach her to ride a bike one day, and that moment where that bike is going and you see the expression of joy on her face and shock that she's not falling over and that she has this new thing called freedom of movement, even, at like, what are they, usually like 5 or 6 years old? And like, oh my gosh, they can go so fast. And now they're scared, but now they're not scared. Like, that's, I think, a moment that every parent remembers. Because like you talked about, even as soon as they say, oh, their face lights up. And so that's the kind of story we have people tell, typically like that, something just quick. So they understand what it's like to be there, to go there. And so then when we say you need to go there, they understand what it feels like. So then we show them the video of it. But then we transition and we have it do with their eyes closed. But of course, we can't testify with our eyes closed. But then we transition with that story. So now we're going to talk about it. And now we have to do it with your eyes open. And, but like when it's eyes closed, I consider it like training wheels for your mind, right?
Yeah.
But then there's just 4 simple rules to follow when testifying. First, when you're asked a question by myself or the defense lawyer, first, make sure you understand the question. If you don't, ask for clarification. And at some point in the witness prep, I'll ask an ambiguous question and if they and when they're like, I don't know what you mean. I'm like, see, that's what you have to do. You have to stop me.
Yeah.
You have to have the courage to stop me and clarify and not just guess, because guessing is where you get in trouble. So first, make sure you understand the question. If you don't, ask for clarification. Then ask yourself, what image must I access in order to answer the question? Then while accessing the image, answer the question. When you're done, close the image up, come back to me, and I'll know you're ready for the next question.
Yeah.
And if you do this, you will be impenetrable to cross-examination, because that's what everybody fears. They're going to embarrass me. They're going to make me look bad. Because then I would take something like this. I'd be like, my cup is green. Isn't that true? What would you say, Ash?
Not true.
No, it's green, right? Just look at it.
No, it doesn't look green to me.
Right. And notice your demeanor. You're not being defensive. You're talking to me like I'm confused. Either I'm colorblind or I don't understand the meanings of the words green versus black. But either way, I'm not a bad guy. And that defense lawyer, he's not a bad guy either. He's just confused, and we're going to unconfuse him. Okay? And then people are like, yeah, we're going to unconfuse him. And so, because then even on that, because now we get to prep. So I was like, so things I teach people on direct are, start off with a general question like, Ash, now I want to talk to you about the day when you're at the hospital and you slip and you fall. Okay? So now we set the time. So I'd be like, tell us about that day. And if you start with, I got up and had breakfast that morning, I'm like, okay, we're going to have to be a little more specific, right? So I really tell people, if they say, I'm in the hospital, okay, then I let them pick their starting point, right? So that way there's less thinking on their part. If I'm telling them where to start, then they got to think, okay, where do I start? So then from there, I'll be like, so tell us what happens. And then, they're like, well, I'm walking through the hospital and, I'm there to see my mom, and I take a step and phew, my foot goes out and I hit the ground. And I'd be like, okay, well, when you slip and you hit the ground, then tell us what happens. Oh, then these people come over, and they're checking on me, and they help me up, and they start and they're asking me if I'm okay, and I tell them I think I am, but I got some pain in my hip, and then they take me down to the ER for an X-ray. And then when they take you to the ER for the X-ray, what does it show? Oh, it doesn't show anything. It's just like a little nothing. And so then what happens? So, then what happens? Well, then I head home. Well, when do you first realize that this hip pain, so obviously I'm always in the present tense. I'm always imagining it. I'm always looping the last answer in this. I'm creating space with my questions. I'm taking them back because you have to be there with them as the guide of the story. So, and then whenever there's an objection, I teach people, if there's an objection, stop. So wait for the ruling. And if I say, Ash, the objection before the objection that the judge had overruled, you were telling us about X. You're telling us how you just got up and went to the ER. Do you remember that? You say, yes. I said, so then tell us what happens. Or when there's a break, from breakfast, let's say to the morning break to the afternoon break. So Ash, before we took the lunch break, we were talking about the results of your X-rays. Do you remember that? Yeah. So tell us what happens when you get the results. So anyways, just looping back, always orientating the witness as to where they're going and, and where we're taking them. And, but because now with the way we teach it now, Ash, we teach with the witness prep and direct examination first. I don't even think we even did that with yours. Then we start out with cross-examination, the defense medical expert cross. Doctor, you're a board certified medical expert. And they'll teach us like pacing, the looping, the present tense, dropping the taglines, dropping all the filler words like and, so, using a flip chart. So training all those skills. But then we practice the opening statement, but we use a trucking case now. So it's much more relevant, because we have a dash cam video. And actually the trucking case that we're doing, that we do the story on now, because obviously when you have a video of the crash and photographs, it's a lot easier for the trial lawyer to imagine it than, the tanning salon case that we used to use, because, not everybody's been to the tanning salon. So they don't even know, they don't have a reference point of it, but everybody's been in a car. And so, but then after that, now we spend, time on people's opening statements, like 30 minutes each, really working an opening statement and creating the story. Then from there, we do now let's do the direct examination of a witness or the plaintiff and a cross-examination of, one of the defendants or the truck driver. So that way everybody's utilizing a similar story to practice their skills. So it's been a big evolution, and we're going to be working hard at Carter Marriott in Connecticut so that when we do eventually get the call for Sweet James University, we'll be ready to answer the bell, Ash. Ready to answer the bell. Ready to answer the bell. Well, Ash, our time here, it's come to an end. I can't wait, dude. Because what were your favorite things about like Huntington Beach? This is the 4th year at the same hotel. Oh, Ash, how do people get a hold of you? Oh my God, I totally forgot to ask this. I'm so sorry. I should ask you this earlier. If somebody says I need to talk to Ash Mohamadi about how to get these damages up because, he's got some secrets. Probably got them from Bobby, but go on.
For sure, from Bobby.
For sure.
Yeah. And if you want to get in contact with me, best way is probably email. My email is ashkahn@sweetjames.com. So this is my first name, ashkahn@sweetjames.com.
All right. And then if anybody ever needs to get a hold of me, the easiest way is, of course, my cell phone, which is 248-808-3130, or then my email is dan@triallawyersuniversity.com. Or I didn't really do the demonstration of the cross-examination. Have I showed you the updated version of it? It's way better than it used to be, but
not yet. No.
Oh man, the new. You know what? People can turn off the. I'm going to show it to you right now because you need to know it for your future.
Wait, I got it 11:30. I wish.
Well, in that case, we have to say goodbye, Ash. I'll have to show it to you in person. Actually, you should do cross-examination workshop at TLU Huntington Beach because it really hones the skills and the performance thing on the trucking case because that's just a 3-hour session. But on your feet, getting the coaching again with the the vehicles moving and creating space, it's really great. So
I'll be there.
I'm not then because you have this 11:30. I'm not going to show you the cross, but we'll talk about it later. Okay? You didn't tell me you were a half hour late. You tell me you had this time crunch on.
You were a half an hour late. Buddy, you got a selective memory.
I'm old. What do you think, dude? It's like I'm happy to have any memory. I'll take a selective one. I got something I can remember from an hour ago. Shit, I'm still celebrating that. All right, Ash, good to see you. And I look forward to seeing you in approximately 21 days when the big party starts at TLU Huntington Beach with because Sweet James is rolling deep at the beach. I think you got about 35 lawyers coming. So that's what we call an army of justice.
Oh, yeah. We'll be there. Good to see you.
Take care.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.